When my father says, "You're not one of us anymore," the room goes so quiet I can hear the old courthouse clock striking 4 through the thin office window. My brother Daniel keeps his eyes on the polished oak desk. His wife, Vanessa, smooths the corner of a cream-colored folder like she's afraid it might wrinkle. The lawyer at the end of the table clears his throat but says nothing, and I stand there in the back office of Carter's Mercantile, the same store where I used to sit on a flour sack and sort buttons for my mother, realizing in one hard, sickening instant that they are not just taking my place from me, they are trying to take my history. My name is Olivia Bennett, and this is a story about what happens when the people you sacrifice your whole life for decide your love was convenient, your loyalty was expected, and your existence can't be signed away with a pen. But that wasn't where it started. Let me take you back. I was 61 years old when my father said those words to me. By then, I had already buried a husband, worn through 2 good pairs of walking shoes pacing hospital corridors, and spent 7 years putting my own life on a shelf so my parents wouldn't have to face old age alone. I grew up in a small Kentucky town called Belmore, the kind of place where everybody knows which pie you bring to the church social and which griefs you never quite recover from. My parents, Harold and Ruth Carter, owned Carter's Mercantile right on Main Street. It wasn't one of those charming little shops you see in magazine spreads, all lace curtains and decorative jars. It was a real working store. We sold hardware, kitchen towels, birdseed, lampshades, canning supplies, and every odd little thing a household might need on a rainy Tuesday. My mother used to say the store had a heartbeat. Listen close enough. She'd tell me with a smile, and you can hear it breathing. And as a child, I believed her. My younger brother Daniel was 3 years behind me, and had the kind of easy charm people forgive too quickly. He could break your lamp and have you apologizing for putting it where his elbow might hit it. I was the dependable one, the quiet one, the one who remembered birthdays, tax deadlines, refill orders, and whether Daddy had taken his blood pressure medicine. None of that felt like a burden when I was young. It just felt like family. I married my husband Thomas Bennett when I was 26. Tom was steady and kind, a man with warm hands and a soft laugh. We moved 1 county over, and for a while I had a life that belonged to me. I worked at the public library. Tom repaired farm equipment. On Sundays, we drove to Belmore for dinner with my parents, and my mother wrapped leftovers in foil, even when I insisted she didn't have to. Daniel, on the other hand, drifted. He started businesses that disappeared before the ink was dry. He borrowed money in polite tones and repaid it in silence. When he married Vanessa, my mother said, very softly while drying dishes, "That woman likes polished things too much." At the time, I thought it was just one of Mother's little observations. Looking back, I should have listened harder. Everything changed the winter my mother had her stroke. It was January 18th. I remember because the roads were slick, and Tom had just gone out to salt our front steps when the phone rang at exactly 6:12 in the morning. Dad's voice sounded older than I had ever heard it. "Olivia," he said, "it's your mama. The ambulance is here." That one sentence split my life neatly in 2. Mother survived, but she was never the same after that. Her right side weakened. Her speech came and went. She hated needing help, hated being lifted, watched, reminded, managed. Dad was still proud and capable in some ways, but by then he was 78 and slowing down more than any of us wanted to admit. Daniel called from Atlanta with concern in his voice and no offer in his mouth. Vanessa sent flowers with a card that said, "Thinking of you all." So I did what daughters like me do. I stepped in. At first, I told Tom it would just be a few weeks. I took leave from the library. Then a few weeks became several months. Tom drove back and forth, sleeping in a recliner at my parents' house on weekends, fixing whatever needed fixing. When Mother's insurance stopped covering enough home care, he looked at me across the kitchen table one night and said, "Liv, stop apologizing. We'll make it work." That man loved me in a way that still humbles me. For 7 years, I was there nearly every day. I managed medications. I helped Mother dress. I handled store invoices when Dad got behind. I cleaned out the apartment above the shop so I could stay overnight when things got bad. After Tom died from a heart attack 2 years into all that, I moved into that apartment full-time because I could not bear the silence of the house we had shared, and because my parents needed me more than ever. Dad told people couldn't do it without Olivia. Mother squeezed my hand when words failed her. Daniel came at Christmas, sometimes Easter. Twice he stayed long enough to take flattering pictures beside Mother's wheelchair and post them online with captions about family blessings. Vanessa would sweep into the store in a fitted coat, kiss the air near everyone's cheek, and talk about how hard it was being so far away. And still, I kept making excuses for them. Maybe that is what love does when it is not balanced by wisdom. It keeps explaining what should be obvious. My mother died on a Thursday in late April just after 2:00 in the afternoon. The azaleas were blooming outside the kitchen window. Dad was in the den when I called him in, and by the time he reached us, she was already gone. There are losses you cry over, and there are losses that go into the bone. Losing my mother was the second kind. At the funeral, Daniel cried loudly. Vanessa wore pearls and held his arm. People praised him for coming in from out of town, and I stood by the church fellowship hall coffee hearing women tell me how strong I was, which is what people say when they are relieved grief is happening to you and not to them. For the first month after Mother passed, Dad leaned on me even more. I made his breakfast. I sat with him on the back porch after supper. I listened to the same stories about the early years of the store. But something began to shift when Daniel and Vanessa started coming up every other weekend. It was subtle at first. Closed office, door conversations, papers stacked neatly where I hadn't left them, Vanessa asking questions in that syrupy voice of hers. Harold, do you even know who has access to all your accounts? Harold, aren't you worried Olivia is overwhelmed? Harold, maybe it's time for fresh eyes, fresh eyes. As though mine had not spent 7 years watching over every inch of that place. One Tuesday, I went to enter supplier payments and found the bookkeeping password changed. I assumed it was a mistake. Daniel laughed and said, just tightening things up, Liv, don't take it personal. I did take it personal, but I still thought it could be talked through. I still believed history mattered. And then came October 14th. It was a Wednesday, crisp and bright. Belmore had one of those blue autumn skies that look painted on. I had spent the morning unpacking new stock in the back room. Mason jars, extension cords, and a shipment of blue enamel, where my mother would have loved. At 3:47 p.m. the phone on the counter rang. It was Dad. Come to the office, he said now. There was no softness in his tone. No explanation, just that. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked to the back office. I remember every little detail, right down to the brass doorknob feeling colder than it should have. Dad was behind the desk. Daniel sat to his right. Vanessa sat straight, backed in a camel, colored coat even though she had no reason to still be wearing it indoors. Beside them was Mr. Larkin, the attorney who had handled my parents' wills for years. Something inside me went still. I smiled, because that is what women like me do before we understand danger. What's all this? I asked. Dad didn't smile back. Sit down, Olivia. I didn't sit. I looked from one face to the next. Am I missing something? Daniel exhaled like I was already making things difficult. Vanessa folded her hands. Mr. Larkin glanced at Dad. Then Dad said, I've made some decisions. The room smelled faintly of old paper and coffee gone cold. I could hear the hum of the soda cooler out in the store. What kind of decisions? I asked. Dad straightened a stack of papers before him. About the business, about the house, about the future. I felt my hands go cold, all right. I said slowly. He looked me right in the face and said, I'm transferring operational control of the store to Daniel. I stared at him. What? It's time, he said. I'm not getting younger. Daniel is my son. He needs to step in. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because my mind rejected what I had just heard. Dad, Daniel lives in Atlanta. Not anymore, Vanessa said smoothly. We've made arrangements. I turned to her. I wasn't asking you. Daniel leaned forward. See, this is exactly the problem. You think you run everything. I do run everything, I said. I've been running it for years. Dad's mouth tightened. You've been helping. I can still feel the way that word landed. I looked at him and said, quieter this time, helping. I've opened this store 6 mornings a week for 7 years. I handled Mama's care. I handled your medication, your taxes, the suppliers. Payroll when George was out sick, the insurance renewals. And we appreciate that. Vanessa cut in. I ignored her. Dad, what is this really? Mr. Larkin slid a folder toward me. Your father has updated the business structure and estate documents. My heart began to thud so hard I could feel it in my throat. I opened the folder. There were legal forms, typed and clipped. An amended trust, a management agreement, a notice to vacate the apartment above the store within 30 days because the residence would now be reserved for business use. I actually had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. Notice to vacate. I whispered. Dad kept his eyes on the desk blotter. Daniel and Vanessa need that space during the transition. I looked up at him. I live there. For now, he said. There are moments when your body understands betrayal before your mind does. Mine did. My ears started ringing. My chest felt tight. Dad, I said, this has to be a misunderstanding. It isn't, Daniel said. I turned to him so fast the chair leg scraped the floor. You be quiet. He stood halfway, jaw clenched. Don't talk to me like that. Like what? Like the man who disappeared every time there was hard work and showed up with a folder when things were stable. Olivia, Dad barked. Enough. That hurt more than it should have, because for one foolish second I expected him to correct Daniel, not me. I looked back at the papers. You're changing the trust, Dad nodded. How? I'm within my rights, he said. And what are these rights exactly? I asked, to throw me out after everything. Vanessa crossed one leg over the other. No one is throwing you out. We're creating structure. I said, you do realize I'm a person, not a box of winter clothes you can move into storage. Her smile never reached her eyes. Then don't behave like one. I looked at Dad again. You promised Mama this store would stay in both our names. You said that in front of me. You said it in this room. He finally lifted his gaze. It was not remorseful. It was hard, defensive, almost irritated that I was making him feel something he did not want to feel. A lot has changed since then, he said. No, I said. You changed. Daniel muttered. There she goes. I ignored him. If this is about money, let's talk about money. If it's about workload, I'm already doing the workload. If it's about grief, then say that. But don't sit there and act like I'm some outsider. Wandered in off the street. That was when Dad said it, not loudly, not dramatically, just flat and cold. You're not one of us anymore, Olivia. I honestly think I stopped breathing for a second. What did you say? His jaw tightened as though he were tired of repeating himself. When you married Thomas Bennett, you built another life, another name, another family. Daniel is my son. This place stays with the Carter line. I felt something in me tear clean through. Another family, I said. Tom has been dead 5 years. Dad said nothing. I heard myself ask, so that's what all this was. I was good enough to wash your sheets and balance your books, but not good enough to belong. Vanessa shifted in her chair. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but not ashamed. Just uncomfortable that the ugly part had finally been spoken aloud. I said all these years I thought I was helping my father, but I was just borrowing a place in my own life. Dad's face flushed. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. I repeated. You're evicting me from my home. Mr. Larkin cleared his throat. There will, of course, be a reasonable transition period. I turned on him. Did you know about this? Did you sit here and write these papers while I was downstairs pricing light bulbs? He looked embarrassed, which at least meant one person in that room had enough conscience left to feel something. I represent your father, he said quietly. Daniel straightened. Look, Liv, no one's saying you can't still be around, but the decision is made. around, I said. Like a visiting aunt. Is that what I've been reduced to? Vanessa said, maybe if you hadn't made yourself so indispensable, this wouldn't feel like such a shock. I stared at her. You planned this. She did not answer, and that told me everything. Dad pushed the folder closer. I need your keys to the office by the end of the day. That sentence is the one that changed my confusion into certainty. This was not grief speaking. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a removal. I set the folder down very carefully because my hands were shaking. No. Dad blinked. What? I said no. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. I'm not handing over a single thing until I've had these papers reviewed. Daniel laughed. Reviewed by who? Someone who doesn't benefit from my silence. He stepped toward me. Don't start trouble. I looked him dead in the face. You should have thought of that before you tried to erase me. Then I walked out. I do not remember crossing the store floor. I remember George, our long-time employee, looking up from the paint counter with alarm in his eyes. I remember the bell over the front door ringing as a customer came in, and me thinking, absurdly, you still have to smile. You still have to function. I made it to the alley behind the store before the first sob hit. I pressed one hand against the brick wall and the other over my mouth because I could not bear the thought of anybody hearing me like that. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might faint. The sky had turned the color of tarnished silver. A delivery truck rattled past the alley mouth. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked twice. And all I could think was this. How could my own father sit in my mother's office and tell me I no longer belonged? I cried for exactly 3 minutes. Then I wiped my face, stood up straight, and went back upstairs to the apartment. Because even then, before I knew how deep the betrayal ran, some part of me understood this was bigger than hurt feelings. This was war dressed up as paperwork, and I had no idea yet how much worse it was about to get. That first night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at my little kitchen table under the yellow light over the sink and reread every page in that folder until the words started to blur. The apartment still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the apples I had stewed the day before. My mother's blue ceramic teapot sat on the stove. Tom's old denim jacket was still hanging by the back door, and there I was, in a home I had lived in for years, reading a formal notice that treated me like a temporary inconvenience. At 2:13 in the morning I made a list: lawyer, bank, copies, medication records, will, trust, business papers. By sunrise, I had 2 headaches and one very clear thought. If my father wanted to reduce me to a signature line, then I would start acting like every line mattered. The next morning I went downstairs as usual. George was unlocking the front door. He took one look at my face and said very gently, "Something happened." I nodded. He stepped inside, closed the door behind us, and lowered his voice. "You want to tell me? I had known George for 24 years. He had worked with my parents nearly as long. He wasn't a curious man, and he wasn't given to gossip. So when I told him plainly, Dad was transferring control. Daniel and Vanessa were moving in. I had been given notice to vacate. George stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "That ain't right." Those 3 words nearly undid me more than the betrayal had. Because when someone witnesses your pain and names it clearly, the truth gets heavier. "Did you know?" I asked him. He shook his head. "No, ma'am, but I knew something was brewing. Daniel's been asking odd questions, vendor contracts, cash flow, insurance, stuff he never cared about before." "Did Dad tell you anything?" "He told me changes were coming." George paused. "He also told me to start sending all bookkeeping questions to Vanessa." My stomach turned. "Vanessa knows nothing about the books." George gave me a sad look. "I know." By 9:30 a.m., Daniel came downstairs with a new swagger I had never seen in him before. He had on a pressed blue shirt, a leather belt with too much shine, and the kind of expression men wear when they think authority is a costume. "Morning," he said, as if nothing had happened. I said nothing. He jingled a new ring of keys. Need the office set cleaned out by Friday. I kept writing on the order sheet in front of me. Did you hear me? He asked. Yes. I said, I heard you. Hearing nonsense and obeying it are different things. His face hardened. Don't do this. Do what? Remain visible. He leaned closer across the counter. Dad doesn't need stress right now. I looked up slowly. Then maybe you shouldn't have brought it into his house. It's not his house only, Daniel snapped. It's family property. Something cold moved through me. Interesting word, family. You seem to use it most when there's something to take. He drew back like I had slapped him. Good, let him feel a fraction of what words can do. That afternoon, I tried one last time to reason with Dad privately. He was sitting in the den, the television on but muted, sunlight cutting across the carpet in a long gold stripe. He looked older than he had a month before. I sat down opposite him. Dad, I said quietly, I need to understand what happened. He didn't look at me. I've already explained. No, you announced. That's not the same as explaining. He exhaled sharply. I'm tired of conflict. I didn't create it. His head turned then. You push, Olivia. You always push. I stared at him. I push. I kept your life standing together with grocery lists and pill boxes and midnight runs to the emergency room. He rubbed his forehead. That's exactly it. You think because you helped, you get to decide everything. Helped, I said. You keep using that word as if I brought over a casserole. He said nothing. I softened my voice. Dad, if you wanted Daniel more involved, we could have discussed that. If you wanted to update papers, we could have done it together. But why the secrecy? Why the apartment? Why say I'm not one of you? For one brief second, pain moved across his face. Real pain. I saw it. Then it closed again. Because, he said quietly, Daniel is the one who carries my name. There it was again. Not confusion. Not manipulation. A belief. An old, stale belief that had apparently been sitting inside my father all these years like a locked drawer. I whispered, and what do I carry? Your groceries, your grief, your mother's china up 3 flights of stairs. He stood up. I will not be spoken to like this in my own home. I stood too. Then maybe don't say cruel things in it. He pointed toward the hallway. Leave? I looked at him for a long moment, waiting for something in him to soften. It never did, so I left. That Sunday, Daniel and Vanessa hosted what they called a family dinner at Dad's house. I almost didn't go, but some stubborn part of me still believed if we all sat at one table and spoke like human beings, perhaps the fever would break. It did not. Vanessa had set the dining room with my mother's good white plates, and the silver she used only on holidays. I cannot tell you how much it offended me to see her arranging those things like trophies. Dad sat at the head of the table. Daniel carved the roast. I barely tasted a bite. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa dabbed her mouth with a napkin and said, We've been discussing some improvements. To what? I asked. The store, she said. Branding, layout, clientele. It's been stuck in the past. I set down my fork. That store fed this family for 43 years. She smiled. Exactly. And now it needs modernizing. Daniel said, We're thinking of bringing in wine baskets, upscale gifts, maybe cutting down the hardware section. I looked at Dad. You're turning the mercantile into a boutique. He avoided my eyes. People don't shop the way they used to. I said, People in Belmore still need nails, birdseed, and canning lids. Vanessa said, People in Belmore also need to stop thinking small. I should have let it go. I know that now. But hearing her dismiss the very people who kept that store alive did something to me. This town kept food on your plate before you ever graced it with your opinions, I said. Daniel put down the carving knife a little too hard. That's enough. No, I said. I'm tired of pretending this is about innovation. It's about greed. Vanessa's face cooled several degrees. That's a serious accusation. Then answer a simple question. I said, Why was I locked out of the books? Dad stood up so fast his chair scraped. We are not doing this at this table. Then where? I asked. In the office where I'm not allowed, in the apartment you're trying to take. Daniel said, For heaven's sake, Olivia, stop acting like a martyr. And then Vanessa said the thing that made the whole room go silent. "Tom would have hated seeing you behave like this." I looked at her. My late husband's name in her mouth felt like dirt. Very calmly I said, "Do not speak about my husband again." She lifted one shoulder. "I'm just saying, maybe if you had built a fuller life of your own, you wouldn't be so attached to ours." Dad did not correct her. He did not say, "Olivia, enough." He did not say that was out of line. He just stood there in the dining room, my mother once filled with warmth, and let another woman reduce my widowhood to a flaw. That was the moment reconciliation died. I rose from the table, folded my napkin, and laid it beside my plate. "Thank you for clarifying things," I said. Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means now I know exactly what kind of people I'm dealing with." I walked out before anyone could answer. But what I didn't know yet was that they had already gone further than insult, much further. 3 days later, at 11:08 in the morning, I walked into Belmore Community Bank to ask for copies of certain old business loan records. I had no dramatic plan then. I was just looking for solid ground. Anita Brooks, the assistant branch manager, had gone to school with me. She wore sensible flats, had kind eyes, and never miscounted anything. When I told her which records I needed, she gave me a strange look. "Olivia," she said carefully, "I can provide what's on your accounts, but some of what you're asking about may need written authorization." "My accounts," I repeated. "I'm asking about the 2009 emergency line on the Mercantile and the refinancing documents attached to it." She blinked. "Yes, those are among the files." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Why are you looking at me like that?" She hesitated. "Because I assumed you already knew." "Knew what?" She lowered her voice. "You and Thomas were listed as personal guarantors on that debt. Later, there was a secured promissory note attached." I stared at her. "A what?" "A secured promissory note," she repeated. "Against the business property. Harold needed immediate funds to clear the tax lien and back invoices. You and Thomas pledged collateral and then converted the arrangement to a documented family loan when your house sold." The bank seemed to tilt around me. Tom and I had helped Dad in 2009, yes. I remembered every painful part of it. The store had nearly gone under after a supplier lawsuit and a terrible flood year. Tom refinanced our home and handed Dad the money because my father had stood in our kitchen with tears in his eyes and said, "I'll never forget this as long as I live." But I had never seen those final conversion papers. Tom handled the bank meetings because I was knee-deep in mother's rehab by then. He told me it was all recorded properly, and that Dad had signed a formal obligation to repay us from the business if anything ever happened. Then Tom died 5 months later, and in grief I never followed up. I felt my mouth go dry. "Anita, do you have copies?" She nodded slowly. "If you're listed, yes." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car with a manila envelope in my lap, and my entire understanding of the last decade changing by the page. There it was, the promissory note for $120,000, the security interest recorded against Carter's mercantile property, a supplementary memorandum naming Thomas Bennett, and after his death me, as secured creditors until repayment. There was even a letter from the bank confirming that Dad had insisted on keeping it within the family, rather than bringing in outside investors. My hands shook so hard, I had to set the papers down. All those years, Daniel and Vanessa had been behaving as if I were a sentimental fool clinging to memories. I wasn't clinging to memories. I had legal standing, and they either knew it or had failed to discover it because they thought I was too soft to matter. I drove straight home and started opening every old file box I owned. By 2:40 p.m., my living room floor was covered in folders, receipts, tax packets, insurance binders, and yellow legal pads. In Mother's old cedar chest beneath a stack of linens, I found one of her spiral notebooks. She used to keep them for everything: shopping lists, church reminders, snippets of garden plans. In the back pages were notes in her shaky post, stroke handwriting, Daniel asking about Deed again. Liv and Tom saved us. Harold must never forget. Vanessa says apartment should be theirs if they move back. I sat back on my heels and stared at those words until my vision blurred. This wasn't new. This had been circling for years. At 5:15 p.m. George called. Olivia, he said, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but a man from Lexington was just here. What kind of man? Developer type. Suit, polished shoes, talking about load. Bearing walls and mixed. Use space. My pulse jumped. Did Daniel speak with him? For nearly an hour, I closed my eyes. So that was it. Not stewardship. Not family legacy. Not even favoritism alone. They were planning to sell. And if they sold the building without clearing the note or acknowledging my interest, they could walk away rich while I got pushed out with a cardboard box and a dead husband's sacrifice buried under new paint. At 6:02 p.m., I did something I should have done months earlier. I called Evelyn Price. Evelyn was a local attorney about my age, sharp as a tack and impossible to intimidate. She had helped me probate Tom's estate and once told a man in county court, "Your confidence is not evidence." I trusted her immediately for that alone. She agreed to meet me the next morning. I barely slept again, but this time it wasn't grief keeping me awake. It was clarity. When I sat across from Evelyn in her office at 9:00 a.m. and laid out the bank documents, mother's notebook, and notice to vacate, she read everything in silence. Then she looked up and said, "Well," I waited. She tapped the promissory note with one red, polished fingernail. "First, they cannot lawfully pretend you're a stranger to this property. Second, if they've negotiated a sale without disclosing this secured interest, they are in trouble. Third, if your father is being misled or pressured, that opens another lane entirely." I swallowed. Another lane. Potential elder financial exploitation. She said, "I'm not saying it is, not yet. I am saying I want eyes on those accounts." I leaned back in the chair and covered my face for a second. How could I have been so blind? Evelyn's voice softened. "Because you were busy being decent." That made me cry harder than any insult had. I dropped my hands. What do I do? Her eyes sharpened. "You stop speaking emotionally and start moving strategically." She made a list. Record the note with the county, if it was not fully indexed in the sale file. Demand a full accounting. Send formal notice of your legal interest. Block any unauthorized transfer. Request business records. And above all, stop warning them what you know. That last instruction mattered most. Because until then, some part of me still wanted to walk in, hold up the papers and say, "Look what I found." Surely you can't keep lying now. But that is not how people like Daniel and Vanessa operate. They do not stop because truth appears. They stop when consequences do, and I was finally beginning to understand the difference. The next 2 weeks changed me, not into someone cruel, not into someone hard, but into someone who no longer mistook passivity for virtue. Evelyn brought in a forensic accountant named Martin Cho, a quiet man with silver glasses and a way of asking simple questions that made dishonesty collapse under its own weight. I gave them everything I had: old ledgers, tax returns, supplier statements, insurance notices, mother's notebook, even Tom's desk calendar from the year of the loan. While Martin reviewed the records, I kept going downstairs to the store because no one had yet physically removed me. Daniel strutted around giving orders nobody respected. Vanessa rearranged shelves and called customers branding opportunities. Dad stayed mostly in the office with the door shut. Outwardly, I was calm. Inside, I was building a case. 3 days into Martin's review, he called me at 7:26 p.m. "Olivia," he said, "sit down if you're not already." I was at my kitchen sink rinsing beans. I turned off the water and sat. "What is it?" "There are irregular transfers from the business account," he said. "Substantial ones." "How substantial?" He paused. "Over 18 months, approximately $86,000, retail purchases, travel, home furnishings, a contractor payment for an address in Atlanta." I closed my eyes. Vanessa's new kitchen, Daniel's leased SUV, Their weekend consulting trips, paid for by the store. Can you prove it? I asked. Yes, he said. And more. Payroll taxes were delayed twice while those transfers were happening. I gripped the edge of the table. Dad knew. I can't say that yet. Martin said, but someone with account access authorized them. After I hung up, I sat in total silence for a full minute. Then I got up, pulled a clean legal pad from the drawer, and wrote in block letters. This was a plan. I wasn't dealing with one cruel sentence from an aging man. I was dealing with a campaign. A slow, careful campaign built on the assumption that the daughter who stayed would remain too loyal to fight back. The next day, I got confirmation of something even uglier. I had gone to the diner on Maple Street around 1:15 p.m. because I knew Daniel liked their meatloaf special, and Vanessa liked to be seen where people might overhear her being important. I wasn't spying, exactly. I was waiting, and sometimes waiting is more useful than talking. I sat in the far booth with coffee and a tuna sandwich. 20 minutes later, in they came, all polished confidence and borrowed authority. They took the booth behind me. At first, I heard only fragments. Closing before Christmas. Once Harold signs the final consent. The old place in assisted living won't be cheap. Then Vanessa laughed softly and said, honestly, once we get him settled, Olivia can play martyr all she wants. Nobody's going to remember who stocked screws and soup ladles. I froze. Daniel said, she'll remember when she's hauling boxes out of that apartment. Vanessa replied, please, she should thank us for giving her 30 days. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Every nerve in my body was awake. Then Daniel said the one thing that burned away whatever pity I still held for him. As long as she doesn't figure out the old loan paperwork, we're fine. I felt the blood drain from my face. Vanessa lowered her voice. Mr. Larkin said there wasn't anything that would stop the transfer. He didn't search hard, Daniel said. My coffee cup trembled in its saucer. That was the moment, right there in Belmore Diner with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, when hurt turned into resolve. They knew maybe not every detail, maybe not every legal consequence, but they knew enough to hide it. I finished exactly half my coffee, left cash under the cup, and walked out without looking back. By 2:40 p.m., I was in Evelyn's office. When I told her what I'd heard, she became very still. Good, she said. I blinked. Good. Not morally, she said. Legally, intent matters. I sat down. Tell me what happens now. She folded her hands. Now we move before they do. And move we did. Within 48 hours, she filed formal notice of my secured interest. She sent demand letters for business records. She notified the developer's attorney that the property title was disputed. She requested an emergency injunction preventing sale or transfer without full disclosure and accounting. Martin prepared a summary of the missing funds, and I did the quiet work no one ever sees in stories like this. I copied every family photograph from the store office before Vanessa could remove them. I packed my mother's recipe box, her embroidery scissors, Tom's old receipt stamp, and the tiny porcelain cardinal mother kept on the windowsill. I changed the mailing addresses on my personal accounts. I opened a new bank box. I made lists. I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because things were over, because for the first time since Dad spoke those words, I knew I was no longer standing empty, handed in the middle of someone else's lie. Meanwhile, Daniel and Vanessa grew bolder. He started calling himself owner to customers. She told Mrs. Prout from church, we're saving the store from stagnation. Dad, astonishingly, let them. That hurt, I won't deny it. There were moments late at night when I would sit on the side of my bed and think, maybe I should walk away. Maybe peace is worth more than being right. But then I would remember Tom signing those bank papers with faith in my family. I would remember Mother's shaky handwriting. Liv and Tom saved us. Harold must never forget. And I would think, no. Walking away would not be peace. It would be permission. Little did they know, by then I was already 3 steps ahead. The final overreach came on a Monday morning at 8:05. I was upstairs watering the geranium on the back landing when I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. Not one set, several. I opened the apartment door and found Daniel standing there with 2 movers and a clipboard. For a second I genuinely thought I might be dreaming. "What is this?" I asked. He gave me a smile so smug it almost looked painful. "Move out assistance." I looked past him at the men in matching grey shirts. They looked embarrassed already, which told me Daniel had not fully explained the situation. "No," I said. He held up the clipboard. "You were given notice, and you were given no authority to enter my home." He tried to step forward. I blocked the doorway. "Move," he said. I did not. His face darkened. "Olivia, don't make a scene." "A scene," I repeated. "You brought strangers to my door like I'm dead, and you're clearing the estate." One of the movers shifted awkwardly. The other looked down the stairs. Daniel lowered his voice. "The meeting with the developer is this afternoon. We need the apartment available for inspection." There it was. Not even the courtesy of pretending any more. I said, "Thank you for saying that out loud." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I crossed my arms. "I'm talking about the fact that you just connected my eviction directly to the sale." He stared at me. Behind him, Vanessa appeared on the stairs in a cream blazer and sunglasses, perched on her head, like she was heading to a luncheon instead of an ambush. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, "are we still doing this?" I looked at her. "I could ask you the same." She smiled without warmth. "You really should have hired a realtor for your own future instead of clinging to ours." The last of my restraint turned to steel. "Get out of my doorway," I said. Daniel laughed once, short and ugly. "You can't stop this." I said very evenly, "You might want to be careful with that sentence." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I replied, "that confidence has made you sloppy." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "Daniel, don't engage." He leaned closer. "You think a little emotional drama is going to save you?" I smiled then, not because anything was funny, but because for the first time he had no idea what room he was actually standing in. "No," I said, "paperwork will." His expression changed just slightly, enough. I closed the door in their faces. At 8:19 a.m. I called Evelyn. At 8:21 a.m. she said, "Perfect, let them proceed." At 9:40 a.m. Martin texted that the developer's attorney had acknowledged receipt of the dispute notice and was deeply concerned. At 10:05 a.m. George called from downstairs. "There's a banker here, and Mr. Larkin, and your father looks upset." I stood very still by the window. The courthouse clock had just struck 10. "What time is the meeting?" I asked. 11:30. I looked at the envelope on my kitchen table, the one Evelyn had told me not to open until she arrived. My heart was beating hard, but not wildly. This was not panic. It was momentum. "I'll be down soon," I said. At 10:47, I dressed carefully in a navy blouse and pearl earrings my mother had given me on my 40th birthday. I brushed my hair. I put on lipstick, not bright, not dramatic, just enough to remind myself that dignity is also a kind of armor. Then I opened Evelyn's envelope. Inside were copies of the filed injunction request, the accounting demand, the notice of secured interest, and a prepared statement for the meeting should I choose to speak. At the bottom, in Evelyn's neat handwriting, were 6 words: "Stay calm, let the truth work." At 11:12 a.m. I walked downstairs. And everything was about to change. The meeting was set in the back office, the same room where Dad had told me I no longer belonged. That, I think, was fitting. When I stepped inside, every chair was full. Dad sat behind the desk, pale and stiff. Daniel stood near the window, trying for confidence and missing by an inch. Vanessa had a legal pad open in front of her, like she was somehow in charge. Mr. Larkin was there, looking uneasy. Beside him sat a man in a charcoal suit I recognized from George's description of the developer. Another woman, likely his counsel, had a laptop open, and standing near the filing cabinet, calm as Sunday morning, was Evelyn Price. Daniel turned when he saw me. "What is she doing here?" Evelyn answered before I could, protecting her interests. Vanessa's chin lifted. "This is a private business matter." Evelyn smiled faintly. Exactly. Dad's eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks I saw uncertainty in them. Olivia, he said, what is all this? I walked to the empty chair across from him and sat down. This, I said, setting my folder on the desk, is what should have happened before you tried to erase me. Daniel made an irritated sound. Oh, for God's sake. The developer's attorney raised a hand. Before anyone continues, I need clarification regarding notices received this morning. Vanessa stiffened. What notices? Evelyn slid copies across the desk. Formal notice of MS. Bennett's secured creditor interest in the property. Notice of disputed authority regarding transfer. Demand for accounting of business funds. And petition for emergency. Injunctive relief. The room changed. You could feel it. Confidence went out of Daniel's face so fast it was almost visible. Vanessa picked up the papers and flipped through them, her color draining page by page. This is ridiculous, she said. Olivia has no ownership claim. Evelyn said, I didn't say ownership. I said secured creditor interest. Though depending on additional records we are still reviewing, other claims may arise. Daniel snapped. That old family loan was handled years ago. I spoke then very clearly. No, it wasn't. He turned to me. You don't know what you're talking about. I opened my folder and laid the promissory note on the desk. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Dad leaned forward. I watched his eyes move over Tom's name. Then mine, then his own signature. His face went grey. What is this? He whispered. I answered softly. This is the paperwork Tom and I signed when we kept the store from going under in 2009. He looked from the note to me like he had never seen either one before. I thought, he swallowed. I thought that was settled. It wasn't, I said. And if anyone had asked me instead of deciding I no longer counted, they would have known that. Daniel jumped in fast. Too fast. Dad, don't let her confuse you. This is just her trying to hold everything hostage because she's bitter. Martin Cho stepped forward, then with another file. If I may, the developer's attorney nodded eagerly. He had the expression of a man who suddenly smelled liability. Martin laid out a summary sheet. In addition to the undisclosed secured interest, our preliminary review has identified significant irregular transfers from Carter's mercantile accounts over the last 18 months. Vanessa said sharply, You had no right to review anything. Evelyn replied, Once client funds and secured interests are implicated, rights expand. Martin continued in the same quiet tone. These transfers include approximately $86,000 in expenditures unrelated to legitimate business operations. He began naming them. A luxury appliance store in Atlanta, airfare furniture deliveries, contractor invoices, a vehicle lease. The developer slowly closed his folder. Mr. Larkin removed his glasses and rubbed between his eyes. Dad turned to Daniel. What is he talking about? Daniel's mouth opened, closed, business development. Martin slid over copies of bank entries. Then perhaps you can explain why payroll tax remittances were delayed while these items were charged. Vanessa's voice rose. This is harassment. I looked at her. No, harassment was showing up at my front door with movers. She froze. Dad turned sharply. What? Daniel said. It was just to prepare the apartment. For the sale. I asked. Silence. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. For the sale, Daniel. The developer's attorney cleared his throat. Mr. Carter, based on these newly disclosed issues, my client cannot proceed with any transaction involving this property unless and until title, debt priority, corporate authority, and account integrity are fully resolved. The developer himself stood up. We're out. Vanessa stared at him. You can't just walk away. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. Watch me. He and his attorney left without another word. Daniel took a step after them. Wait, Evelyn said. Sit down. This part concerns you. He turned back, furious. You did this. I met his stare. No, Daniel. I documented what you did. Dad looked stricken. There was going to be a sale. No one answered him quickly enough, so I did. Yes, he looked at me. You knew. I suspected. Then I learned the truth. His shoulders seemed to fold inward. Vanessa found her voice first. Harold, please don't let her manipulate this. We were trying to modernize the property, make it profitable. I said, by putting my father in assisted living and moving yourselves into the apartment. Dad jerked his head toward her. What? Her face changed. Just for a second. And that second was enough. I took a folded sheet from my file. George heard enough. I heard more at the diner. You said once the final consent was signed, he'd be settled. Your word, Vanessa. Daniel's face went white. You were listening to us, he demanded. I was learning who you are. Dad stood up too fast and had to catch the desk edge. Daniel, he said, voice shaking, were you planning to move me out? Daniel tried to recover. Dad, not like that. We were just discussing options. Without me, and no, without me. Dad shouted louder than I had heard him in years. The whole room went still. Sometimes truth does not thunder. Sometimes it just removes every place a lie can hide. Mr. Larkin spoke at last, voice heavy with strain. Harold, I was given to understand the family debt had been satisfied and that Olivia had no continuing legal interest. I turned to him. By whom? He looked at Daniel. That was answer enough. Evelyn slid one final document across the desk. Given the financial irregularities and disputed authority, we are also requesting temporary suspension of all non-essential business withdrawals pending review. The bank has been notified. Dad sank back into his chair. Bank. As if on cue, Anita Brooks appeared in the doorway with the branch manager, who must have been waiting just outside. He spoke carefully, respectfully. Mr. Carter, as a precautionary measure, certain business account privileges are being limited until authorized signatures and purposes can be verified. Daniel stared at him. You froze the accounts. The branch manager replied, restricted pending review. Vanessa rose so abruptly, her chair scraped. This is insane. Harold, say something. Dad did say something, but not what she expected. He looked at me with a face I barely recognized and whispered, Olivia, did you and Tom really save the store? There are questions that come too late and still break your heart. I said yes. He shut his eyes. I didn't know. He murmured. I wanted to be cruel in that moment. I did. I wanted to say you didn't want to know. There's a difference, but I didn't, because cruelty would have made me like them. Instead, I said, you didn't ask. Daniel slammed his hand on the desk. This is absurd. She's turning everyone against us over some old paperwork and a few expenses. Martin answered, it is not a few expenses. Evelyn added, and it is not old paperwork when the debt remains outstanding and concealed during a proposed transfer. Vanessa's voice sharpened to a near hiss. Fine. What exactly do you want, Olivia? The room looked at me. That is the part people rarely understand. They think justice is just anger finally getting a microphone. But when the moment comes when everybody is watching, waiting to see what kind of person grief and betrayal have made you, you find out whether your pain has hollowed you or clarified you. I folded my hands in my lap and said, first, I want a full accounting. Every dollar. Second, I want any transfer, sale, or occupancy change stopped until the court reviews it. Third, I want apartment and my access rights restored immediately. Fourth, I want my father represented independently, not through the people who lied to him. Daniel laughed bitterly. You want control. I looked at him. No, I want truth. Control is what you wanted, Vanessa said, and after that, I took a breath. After that, I want what should have happened from the beginning. My husband's loan repaid, my role acknowledged, my mother's wishes respected, and if the store continues, it continues honestly. Dad's eyes filled. I had not seen my father cry since my mother died. Olivia, he said, I made a terrible mistake. The words landed softly, but they did not heal anything. Not then. Some wounds need time, and some need boundaries more than apologies. I nodded once. Yes, you did. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. Dad, you can't be serious. Dad turned slowly toward his son. I trusted you. Daniel's face twisted. I was trying to build something. You were trying to take something, I said. He looked at me with open hatred then, the kind that finally stops pretending to be righteousness. You always thought you were better than us. No, I said, just more responsible. Vanessa grabbed her bag. We are leaving. Evelyn said calmly, you may. But be aware that records have been preserved, notices filed, and further removal of business property may expose you to additional claims. That stopped her. The look on her face was not shame. It was calculation interrupted by fear. Good. Within the hour, the locks to the office were ordered changed under temporary agreement. Daniel and Vanessa were barred from unauthorized account access. George stayed on as witness while inventories were secured. Evelyn arranged for an independent elder or attorney to meet with Dad. Martin took custody copies of the books. And me, I went upstairs, closed my apartment door, and sat at my kitchen table in utter silence. Not triumphant, not gleeful, just still. At 1:42 p.m., I poured a cup of coffee and realized my hands were no longer shaking. Justice had begun. The weeks that followed were not easy, but they were clean, and after months of lies, clean felt holy. The accounting confirmed what we already suspected. Daniel and Vanessa had diverted store funds for personal expenses, concealed the outstanding family debt, and misrepresented the property status during preliminary sale discussions. Their access to business operations was formally revoked. A civil repayment agreement was reached before criminal charges were pursued, though I was prepared to go further if necessary. They sold the Atlanta house renovations at a loss. The shiny SUV disappeared within 2 months. Vanessa never apologized. Not once. Daniel did eventually, though even that came tangled in self-pity. He showed up on my porch one rainy Thursday around dusk, hands in his pockets, eyes red, rimmed. I messed up, he said. I stood in the doorway and waited. He looked past me into the apartment, maybe hoping to see softness there. I thought you'd fold. At least it was honest. I said, yes, you did. He swallowed. Can we fix it? And maybe, if he had asked that before the theft, before the lies, before the movers on my stairs, maybe the answer would have been different. But not then. I told him some things can be repaired. Some things can only be survived. Right now, I'm surviving. Then I closed the door. Dad changed more slowly. Age does not excuse betrayal, but it does complicate it. The truth was this. He had loved me in his own limited, old-fashioned way. He had also let his pride, his preference for sons, and his fear of dependence rot his judgment from the inside. Both things were true at once. That is one of the hardest lessons of getting older, I think. Sometimes the people who harmed you are not monsters. They are just weak in the exact places you needed them strong. Dad began coming upstairs for coffee on Sundays. At first we barely spoke beyond weather and store schedules. Then one morning in February he looked around my kitchen, the blue teapot, Tom's jacket, Mother's cardinal on the sill, and said, I don't know how to ask forgiveness without sounding like I'm asking for comfort. I set down my mug. That's the first honest thing you've said in months, I told him. His eyes filled. I was wrong. Yes, I said. He nodded. About Daniel, about you, about what belonging means. I let that sit between us. Then I said, you don't get to undo it, but you do get to live differently now. And to his credit, he tried. He met with a new attorney. He restored my formal role in the business. More than that, he signed an agreement acknowledging repayment of the loan from Tom's estate with interest. And when I told him I didn't want revenge money, I wanted recognition, he asked me what that looked like. I had already decided. The next spring, after a long winter of paperwork, repainting, and honest accounting, we reopened the store under a slightly different name. Not Carter's Mercantile. Ruth and Olivia Mercantile. Dad himself insisted on the sign. When the painter lifted the tarp, and those words came into view above Main Street, a hush went over the small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. Mrs. Prout cried openly. George squeezed my shoulder, and Dad, standing beside me with his hat in both hands, said quietly, Your mother would have liked that. I think she would have. Daniel came by once after the new sign went up. He stood across the street a long time looking at it. He didn't come in. Vanessa never did, and that, too, was a kind of answer. As for me, I stayed in the apartment. I kept the blue teapot. I planted fresh geraniums on the back landing. I expanded the canning section just because Vanessa said no one wanted it. Turns out Belmore still did. People came in and lingered again. They ran their hands over dish towels and bolts and seed packets, and said the store felt like itself. Not new, not old, just honest, and that mattered more to me than victory, because in the end I did make sure they would never forget me. Not by screaming, not by destroying anyone, not by becoming bitter. I made sure by refusing to disappear, by putting my name where my labor had always been, by standing still when they expected me to crumble, by letting the truth take up space. If you're listening to my story and you're going through something similar, if someone in your family has mistaken your kindness for weakness, your silence for surrender, your loyalty for something they can spend, please hear me when I say this. Love does not require self-erasure. Family is not ownership. And blood means very little if respect is absent from the room. I learned that silence can be graceful, but it should never become permission. I learned that dignity is not the same thing as passivity. And I learned that sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is gather her papers, steady her voice, and say, no, you will not write me out of my own life. So if you've been made to feel invisible, unwanted, or not one of us, by people who should have cherished you, I hope you remember my story the next time somebody asks you to accept less than what is right. Stand up, stay calm, tell the truth, and let it work. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments.